If it bleeds, we can kill it.
Control their matchup against the 49ers.
Something on the web about their 19-plus point game at 4 weeks so I can finish route 50 yards and 1 touchdown.
What the?
It's Halloween, I'm scared.
Oh, series of ghosts.
I'm scared.
My productive ball touches can.
What could I have said to activate Siri?
Sometimes a word would
As well as physically.
Sometimes a word would touch. Pineapple is neither a pine nor an apple. Discuss.
All right, let's fucking nail this like a split hog. Gucci?
Steve Marigucci.
You idiot. You idiot.
If you're an idiot, we can kill him. I heard it go, and I was like,
What the hell? Okay. I'm there. I'm right there. I'm there. I'm so close.
don't move.
I'm there. I lost it.
And there it is. Elephant.
Welcome back to another episode of the Dual Threat Podcast. I'm your host, Sam, here with my co-host, Nor, and JB behind the glass. The gang is back together here to break down Week 8 action of the NFL. Nor, you've been gone for a while. I'm not sure anyone's missed you. How do you feel?
I'm not that drunk.
All right, so we're going to change the format up a bit to tighten up our time frame here. So let's move on away from news and notes around the NFL. I'm sure everyone has their own sources. Let's move into analyzing the trades and waivers that took place last week. So let's move on to first, last Wednesday, Slater traded away his 2018 fifth-round pick for Jameis Winston to Gomez. You think this makes sense for both sides here, Nor?
I think it does. I think Mike was looking to add capital. Obviously, Slater needs a quarterback that he feels like can start week to week, while Jameis Winston is seemingly very volatile in terms of his fantasy output. He is a guy that's capable of some very big weeks, regardless of matchup, based on the volume that the Tampa Bay offense throws. And Slater's got no choice but to ride or die with him.
Yeah, not much choice when your backup is Trevor Siemian, so Slater needed to pull the trigger here, gets the deal done to secure Jameis Winston for just a fifth-round pick in 2018. Okay, so another trade that took place was on Friday. Slater, involved in some action again, traded away his 2019 first-round pick for tight end Travis Kelce. Mike Ariola, the recipient of that first-round pick. What are your thoughts on that trade?
I think any trade Mike can pull right now to get some extra draft capital might be helpful for him. It's always interesting to me to see these trades that are way down the road, but Travis Kelce is one of the few commodities I think he was able to move at this time, so probably has a high probability of working out for both sides. Travis Kelce obviously had a very good week. In terms of the tight end landscape, tight end's obviously a wasteland this year, so there's only a couple of tight ends worth starting, but as we'll touch on later, Mike was able to plug in another guy and keep rolling. So I think it worked for both sides.
Okay, so that was all the big action that took place in the transaction world of the Gridiron Gala. Let's move on to our matchup review section. Matchup 1, Kevin versus Ferrales. Man of the match, Jerick McKinnon returns to form here as he follows up last week's 5-point dud with a 20-point outing. His third 19-plus point game in 4 weeks. McKinnon finished with 50 yards and 1 touchdown on 14 carries to go along with 72 yards on 6 catches. It was a productive day heading into the bye for the Vikings. McKinnon has been hyper-productive on a high volume of touches. He will look to continue that consistency in Week 10 against the Redskins. Biggest disappointment. Wendell Smallwood may have been a victim of game script here as the Eagles were in complete control of their matchup against the 49ers. But Smallwood got the start for Kevin this week and finished with 2 touches on 14 yards and finished with 0 fantasy points. With the Eagles defense playing so well, it is hard to see game scripts that favor Smallwood moving forward, especially with the addition of Jay Ajayi. Overall thoughts. It appears Kevin's collapse is complete. It was an admirable effort to soldier on after losing David Johnson, but it appears the loss of Aaron Rodgers has taken all the life out of Kevin's sails. Kevin finished with 57 fantasy points, and without some help from the waiver wire, the future isn't bright. Ferrales continues to ride Bell and McKinnon to high-scoring victories, and even though it was a terrible game for Dak Prescott, he wasn't needed as both teams moved to 4-4 on the year.
So much like real Aaron Rodgers, the fantasy version of Aaron Rodgers was clearly masking some of the deficiencies on Kevin's team. And now that he's not there to help keep the team rolling, we're really starting to see what kind of thin margin for error Kevin's had to deal with all year. It's just become way more prevalent now. It's really hard for me to sit here and call Kevin's team flatlined after what he's been able to accomplish the last few years. So I'm always going to kind of expect him to be able to pull some kind of trade or other wizardry out of his hat. But it's looking pretty steep for Kevin right now.
Matchup 2, Tony versus Jason. Man of the match. CJ Anderson delivered in a big way on Monday Night Football. Tony found himself down 6 points going into Monday night in his tilt against Jason. CJ Anderson did just enough, finishing with 15 carries for 78 yards and 7 fantasy points. CJ Anderson delivered a clutch performance here to secure Tony the 1-point victory, 87-86.
Not again.
Biggest disappointment. Derek Carr failed to make a big impact against the Buffalo Bills defense, finishing 31 of 49 for 313 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Jason had to have been disappointed with Carr's 12-point fantasy performance, and his poor performance may have been the difference in Tony's 1-point victory. Overall thoughts. It's amazing that Tony still decides to go with Breeze rather than Watson at the QB position, and it almost cost him this week as Breeze put up a paltry 11 fantasy points. LaShawn McCoy carried the day at home against the Raiders, scoring 23 fantasy points and appears to be a strong addition to this team. Despite Jason's strong team name this week, he fell short and Tony moves on to 6-2, while Jason drops to 3-5.
Yeah, I mean, Jason did everything he could here with the team name warfare that we've all grown to love. Obviously, a really close one. This one's a heartbreaker. Not a whole lot to dig in here. I think being at 3-5, though, given the rest of the standings right now, still certainly in the mix in terms of how the rest of the year could play out. And Tony getting the win makes the top third of the standings really start to get tricky going from here. So I think we're right where we want to be. Well, it seems like a lot of teams are alive, and hopefully JB can bounce back next week.
Matchup 3, Cory versus Slater. Man of the match. DeAndre Hopkins had one of the best games of his career as he was a recipient of 8 catches for 224 yards and a touchdown during Sunday's shootout against the Seattle Seahawks. Hopkins' 11 targets was the 3rd lowest total of the season, but he had more receiving yards than his last 3 games combined. It was an impressive showing and shows that what Hopkins is capable of in this new-look Texans offense if his number is called. Biggest disappointment. In one of the ugliest games of Sunday's action, Jameis Winston had a pathetic showing against the Carolina Panthers at home, finishing 21 of 38 for 210 yards, no touchdowns, and accounting for 3 turnovers. Winston finished with just 3 fantasy points, a huge letdown after his 22-point performance last week against a tough Bills defense. Overall thoughts. Once again, Slater is on the losing end of one of the biggest blowouts of the season, eerily reminiscent of his big loss earlier in the season to Noor. It appears Slater continues to play against these record-setting performances. His recently acquired pieces Kamara and Lamar Miller played well as they accounted for 30 fantasy points, but there was little to do in the face of Cory's 141 fantasy point performance. Cory rolls to 6-2, while Slater drops to 2-6.
Yeah, as you touched on, DeAndre Hopkins went full ham sandwich even on this matchup. And with the amount of points Cory was able to put up, yeah, it's frustrating for Slate to have to deal with Winston having a bit of a poor showing or a very poor showing. Sometimes if a guy's going to have a bad week, you'd almost rather have it be when the matchup is already going completely one way versus the other. So hopefully this is Winston's only dud, and Slater can count on him going forward because as we touched on earlier, he's really kind of got to go all in on that basket.
Matchup 4, Sam versus Gomez. Man of the match. It was another poor showing from most members of my starting roster, but Russell Wilson really carried the day here as he finished 26 of 41 for 452 yards and 4 touchdowns and 1 interception to go along with 30 yards on the ground. Wilson finished with 34 fantasy points in the aforementioned shootout with the Houston Texans. The Seahawks all but abandoned the run, and Russell Wilson was more than up to the task as he led the Seahawks to a last-second win against Houston. Wilson now has 26 or more fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 games. Biggest disappointment. Jordan Reed finally appeared to be at full health last week, finishing with 18 fantasy points on 8 catches. Unfortunately, he was hurt again early this week in Week 8 matchup against the Cowboys and finished with 0 fantasy points. It appears Reed just can't stay healthy for any period of time, and he will be coming to a waiver wire near you. Overall thoughts. It was admirable effort from many players of Gomez's team, but his skill position players failed to make the impact he must have hoped for. It appears the reliable RB1 weeks for Chris Thompson are officially over, and it will be tough for Gomez to play the matchups with his current running back core. On the flip side, Will Fuller appears to be defying all logic as he now has 7 touchdowns in his last 4 games. I didn't need him this week though, as both teams moved to 4-4 on the season.
Yeah, a couple of quick points here. You mentioned Chris Thompson. I think it's been really surprising to me to see the type of impact that Kirk Cousins has been able to have without relying heavily on Terrell Pryor or Jordan Reed, or at this point even Chris Thompson. I mean, he did have a pedestrian game this week with some turnovers, but he's still been able to have a pretty safe year. Just kind of surprising given how well Chris Thompson was doing earlier. But the pace he started out at, we just knew it wasn't gonna be sustainable. Will Fuller that you mentioned, I mean, this whole Houston offense just continues. Like every week, you kind of expect them to finally get their reality check, maybe in terms of having a misstep, but they just keep going. And man, it just looks like they've got all the right pieces to really make a serious run here. I was really interested in this matchup against Seattle to see how they went against that defense and in hostile territory. But man, this really turned out to be the most entertaining game of the week, and was really surprised that they were able to just keep taking shots downfield. And we touched on Hopkins earlier. I didn't even remember or know that he had the jets like that to take a screen all the way to the house the way he did. So Houston offense, man, just continues to roll.
Matchup 5, Nor versus Areola. Man of the match.
Yes, Master, man of the match.
Monday night was a big proving ground for both of these teams as it came down to a showdown between Kareem Hunt and Kansas City's defense. The KC defense shined against the struggling Broncos offense, compiling 3 sacks, 3 interceptions, 2 fumble recoveries, and a defensive score en route to a 22 fantasy point performance. This proved to be the difference in the matchup. Biggest disappointment. T.Y. Hilton had 2 catches for 15 yards and continues to disappoint as he has now scored 3 or fewer fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. It will be interesting if Nor decides to start him moving forward. Chinks in the armor are definitely beginning to show as Nor has lost 2 of his last 3 matchups. Overall thoughts. In a shocker, Mike secures his first win of the season against the once unstoppable Nor. Mike's average points against have dropped 6 points in the last 2 weeks, and perhaps that is just the opening he needs to climb out of this deep hole. Nor continues to struggle, and perhaps his depth was overestimated now with the seemingly useless Abdullah and Montgomery. It was a tough go as Gurley and Fournette were both on bye, so a true test of Nor's resolve will be next week when his 3 running backs return healthy. Congrats to Mike on his first win as he moves to 1-7, while Nor drops to 6-2 and a 3-way tie for first place.
Yeah, you hit on it. That Monday night game, I was really hoping it was going to end up being a shootout. I think that was the only way that things were going to swing in my favor, being that I was down going into it and needed to obviously outdo the KC defense. But right away, I think Marcus Peters took care of that by himself, and the rest of it was kind of history. No excuses here. Good win for Mike. Clearly, Mike and Mike have my number in this league. Can't seem to get past either one of them. But I think bye weeks and the rest of your schedule and things like that, they all play a part. So I'm more inclined to be happy that a majority of my bye weeks are now out of the way. I still got a couple coming up that have to do more with some of my remaining wide receiver bench, which is obviously less of a concern. So hopefully, as soon as this week, can just get back to work and get it going again. I really was happier with my depth early in the season, especially when my team was rolling from week to week. But certainly a concern should anything happen to any of my go-to starters. So we'll have to see if anything needs to be done about that.
Mike and Mike have your number, huh?
Oh yeah.
So would you say it's Mike and Mike in the Noring? I'll be here all week. They loved it.
Oh wow.
Yeah, they heard me.
Should record Siri for that one.
Best start of the week. It was an interesting start to the weekend as Areola traded away his prized tight end Travis Kelce, but his master plan was revealed as he immediately picked up Jack Doyle, who torched the Cincinnati Bengals for 12 catches, 121 yards, and a touchdown on 14 targets. Doyle finished with 18 fantasy points, more than his last 4 weeks combined. It was an amazing find on the waiver wire and a great spot start for Mike.
Yeah, as I said, tip of the cap to Mike here. This one kind of had like a two-pronged effect. In one, he was able to trade Kelsey and just plug in a guy that went straight to work. And also, Jack Doyle took literal targets and points away from T.Y. Hilton. So it worked out really well for him this week.
Worst start of the week.
Special Officer Doofy reporting. Hey, Doofy, smell my fingers.
I couldn't find one. After much debate, I feel like everyone made justifiable starts this week. Not gonna fault anyone for bad luck. Good job, fellas.
Yeah, we're not stupid. I got a good brain.
What's that noise?
Yeah, here.
Wait, didn't you say that this place, Slater used to live here?
This is built on the old Slater spare ground.
Is that the ghost of complaints past?
That's it, guys. I'm done.
All right, thanks, guys. Well, welcome to another installment of Slater Slanders. So I took last week off, but apparently Sam and Nora wanted to do their own covert operation and not include anyone. But not bitter about that. And then, wow, I'd be remiss if I just didn't lead off with Deshaun Watson. Holy shit. So many emotions today that ran through me. I mean, you get Sam trading Will Fuller, who I'll get into that in a second. How he even had Will Fuller in the first place. Trades him, and a second for Drew Brees in a first. You know, on the surface, it looks pretty good, you know. But you see this today, and Sam makes that trade. Sam, a.k.a. Tanya Harding, taking kneecaps out, just swiping kneecaps. I've never seen anything like that. I mean, to get a trade like that and then 2 hours later have something like that and a domino effect on that is just, I mean, it hurt me. That's why I'm saying all these emotions. I was happy. I shouldn't say happy, but if you guys knew what I had to go through with Tony these last few weeks getting Deshaun Watson, it became a running joke. I mean, I would have offered my first newborn for him. I was offering so much, and it was just like, and then you know what got me is just like, I would go through this whole elaborate thing and drawing these things up, and all I get is a no in a text. It's just like, it drove me nuts. And so I was a little happy about that, because if you guys knew what I had to go through, trying to get Watson, Jesus, I mean, it was just incredible. But yeah, and I'll never understand. I've asked this 5 times already. Why, Kevin? Why did you drop Will Fuller? I don't get it. I will never understand it. We have 2 IR spots for a reason, and you just drop them. I didn't understand it then. It's not like he had an albatross contract where it was like, well, I saved, $20 if I cut him. It was like, what, $7 or something like that? And then Sam swoops in. I mean, if that isn't collusion, but yeah, and I just look at my phone and I see that Sam grabs Tony by the balls and gets another second out of Breeze. So he milked a first and second out of him. Easy on Tony. Easy up on him. Jeez, what's next? You gonna try to fuck Destiny? Easy up on the man. don't take all his shit. Yeah. But yeah, I mean that's crazy today with Watson. And I'm going to feel the effects too with Miller, but yeah, I've never seen anything like that where it was so bang bang like that. I mean, I couldn't think of a worse combo for Tony to trade for, but yeah. But yeah, I think, man, it's coming down to crunch time. I'm getting real scared now. Mike's winning. God damn it! Stop winning. But I think next week, I think we play each other. That's going to be, wow. That's going to be an absolute, I mean, everyone's going to be watching that. That's literally, it could potentially be Beer Bitch Bowl. We're getting down. Next week is week 10. So, man, keep losing, Mike. Stop. But, yeah, we'll keep an eye on that next week. Wow, I just had to jump on and really talk about that Watson. I couldn't believe it. I felt like it was like a dream. Couldn't believe it. But nothing. But yeah, God, a first and a second, you milked that shit, you son of a bitch. Tony got his breeze back, but we will see you guys next week, and I'll talk about the vaunted matchup between Mike and I. Can't wait. It's going to be, oh man, it's going to be a shootout. But yeah, so we'll see you guys next week, and good luck, everybody. Just kidding. Bye.
Matchup preview. Nor, what's a matchup that you're most looking forward to next week?
So I was actually really close to picking my own matchup here, going toe to toe with Tony. I think it would have been. There's clearly a lot of writing on the wall for how these team names can go, and we'll see if I can get back on the right track. But the real matchup I'm going to be spotlighting this week is Cory against your boy. Sam.
He pointed at me.
I pointed at Sam. Everyone can see that, I'm sure. One of these days I'll figure out how radio and stuff works. But it's a big week, obviously. Cory's been on quite the run lately, and of all people to bring him back down to earth, I'm hoping it ends up being the man to my left. Cory's also got some matchup challenges to deal with the Patriots on a bye. Obviously, a core component of his team is that always dangerous Brady to Gronk stack. So let's see how the rest of this shakes out. But I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, I am fully torqued thinking about this matchup without Tom Brady, Rob Gronkowski, and Ezekiel Elliott. So I don't mind kicking Cory when he's down. I'll say it. The matchup that I'm looking forward to is Mike versus Kevin. It would have been sexier if Mike had lost this week, if he had any kind of competition. Then he would have been searching for his first win against the floundering Kevin. But Mike Arriola got the win this week, so let's see if he can keep it rolling against the Kevin's team that could not be colder. That's what I'm looking forward to this week. With those sections out of the way, let's move on to our final segment here, our weekly power rankings. Speaking of Kevin's cold team right now, Kevin Wallen ranks in at number 10, 4-4. The fall from grace is now complete. The window appears to be all but shut as this team is devoid of any discernible talent. When your running backs are Tariq Cohen, Orleans Darkwa, Adrian Peterson, and Wendell Smallwood, I think that speaks for itself. Number 9, Alex Slater, 2-6. Dez's debut was disappointing. We will see what Ajayi's move to Philly does for his fantasy outlook, but it was an overall disappointing week for Slater. At least his trade for Kelsey appears to have been sound, as Kelsey finished with 19 fantasy points. His inconsistent QBs and wide receivers have him low in this week's rankings. Number 8, Mike Arriola, 1-7. A stunning defeat of Nor in Week 8 bumps up Mike 2 spots here, but the aforementioned Jay Ajayi move to Philly may all but kill LeGarrette Blount's value. Ingram still may be able to carry the load at running back, but I still like the wide receiver talent. We will see if this is a turning point for Mike's fantasy fortunes, or will be much of the same. Number 7, Jason Bercese, 3-5. A close loss to Tony in a disappointing matchup. Jason's depth was tested in this matchup, and they came up short as Dion Lewis, Nelson Aguilar, and Jarvis Landry combined for 10 fantasy points. Melvin Gordon performed well, but couldn't carry this team to victory as Jason continues his downward spiral. Number 6, Alex Gomez, 4-4, losing in convincing fashion to yours truly in Week 8. Gomez failed to have an explosive game from one of his volatile players, and it cost him dearly. Consistent scoring is going to be an issue with players like Tevin Coleman, Jalen Richard, and Chris Thompson who rely on the big play. He is a dangerous one-week opponent, which makes his attempt to return to the playoffs a scary proposition. Number 5, Sam Nix, 4-4. I finally pick up a win here in what seems like a lifetime, benefiting greatly from strong performances of my kicker, defense, and quarterback. Hard to rely on that production as yet again my skill position players failed to get in the end zone, combined with disastrous start-sit decisions that left 4 touchdowns on the bench. Number 4, Michael Feralis. Mike followed up his disappointing Week 7 with a strong Week 8 as he overcame Dak Prescott's 6-point performance with a huge bounce-back week from Jerick McKinnon. The rest of the team held serve, and Mike really profited off the Eagles' defensive performance. The wide receiver position may continue to bother Mike moving forward, but we will see. Number 3, Tony Funston, 6-2. Narrowly escaping with a win in Week 8, Tony is really counting on his studs to carry him to victory. Luckily, they have delivered on a consistent basis. The talent is obvious on his roster, but it isn't as plentiful as it was in Week 1. Number 2, Noor Sandhu, finally budging from his perch. Noor drops 1 spot this week as he loses 2 out of 3 weeks. The talent is still there, and Noor can still count on the core of Hunt, Fournette, Gurley, and Green moving forward. Still, the best top-to-bottom roster talent-wise, but his players are finally not producing at a historically consistent level.
Number 2?
And number 1, Cory Hart, 6-2. It is undeniable that no one is playing hotter than Cory right now, coming off a stunning 141-point performance. Cory has found a way to maneuver and to solidify his position of strength. Zeke's pending suspension could alter this dynamic, but I want to see Zeke miss a game before I factor that into Cory's ranking. Nor those are this week's power rankings. What's your feedback? What do you got?
I got to say, I agree with most of the placement here. Sort of just touching on something I alluded to earlier. I think just even from Jason's spot all the way up through the top, I think that a lot of these teams could interchange.
I say leave it in.
You're trick-or-treating in the back.
So I'd have to agree with the placement of most of these teams on the list this week. I think that there's still a lot of room for change in terms of, just what I alluded to earlier with Jason being 3-5. I mean, there's 3 different teams that are 4-4 above him. So really things could change any given week here. In terms of my ranking, slipping down to number 2, I think, it makes sense. I mean, Cory's team is just rolling right now. I've gone 1-2 in the last 3 weeks. So, I think it's sound reasoning here. We'll see how Cory's team rolls, not just this week with the bye weeks we mentioned and Zeke's suspension apparently finally happening, maybe. I don't know. By the time this podcast goes live, maybe he'll have appealed again, or who knows. But even beyond this week, it'll be interesting to see how his team continues to go, because Zeke had just been getting it going these last 2 weeks. So we'll see what Cory's team has in store.
And there you have it. Thank you for joining us for another ghoulish episode of the Dual Threat Podcast.
More like the Ghoul Thread Podcast.
Thank you for joining us. We will be back next week with an even spookier version.
Do you guys like when Sam tries to go spooky? It starts out Borat, and then it comes into Count
I'm
Chocula.
not spooky.
I'm gonna scare you.
I scare little girls.
You have candy, how much? On Halloween, my wife dressed up as #1 prostitute in America.
Please take chocolate-covered rat.
Happy Halloween.
He did the mash. He did the monster mash.
The monster mash.
It was a graveyard smash.
He did the mash.
It caught on in a flash.
He did the mash.
He did the monster mash. From my laboratory in the castle east to the master bedroom where the vampires feast. The ghouls all came from their humble abode to get a jolt from my electrode.
They did the mash,
They did the Monster Mash.
the monster mash.
It was a graveyard smash.
They did the mash.